Before we begin, take a moment and hit the subscribe button. This channel is where ancient stories rise again, not as distant legends, but as living, breathing human battles that still echo through time. If you value stories of courage, faith, struggle, and destiny, subscribe now, and let's walk into the Valley of Elah together. The morning sun rose over the Judean hills, washing the land in gold. But this was not a peaceful dawn. The Israelite camp stood restless. Soldiers sharpened dull blades, tightened cracked leather armor, and stared across a valley that seemed far too quiet. On the opposite ridge lay the armies of the Philistines, hardened warriors, iron-speared, shielded like a wall of scaled bronze. The air smelled of dust, sweat, and fear. But the true terror was not the army. It was the giant, a figure nearly 10 feet tall, armored from head to foot in gleaming plates. His name, Goliath of Gath, champion of the Philistines. A man whose voice rolled across the valley like thunder. A man who had crushed every challenger with a casual brutality that left even seasoned fighters pale. Every morning, he stepped into the open valley. And every morning, Israel trembled. Goliath stepped forward again, slamming his spear into the earth. The ground seemed to quake. "Choose a man to fight me," he bellowed. "If he kills me, we will serve you. But if I kill him, you will serve us." Silence. Even the birds stopped singing. King Saul, once a mighty warrior himself, remained in his tent, weighed by fear, age, and the heavy knowledge that no man in Israel could match the strength now taunting them. No one stepped forward. Not today. Not yesterday. Not for 40 days. Miles away, far from the battlefield, a young shepherd tended his flock. His name was David, the youngest son of Jesse, small in stature, quick with words, quicker with a sling. He was not a soldier. He was not trained. He was not even old enough to be in the war. And yet, destiny often whispers where no one is listening. David played his harp under an olive tree. His voice rose in songs of faith, not rehearsed hymns, but words born from watching storms sweep across the hills and seeing predators stalk the helpless. He knew danger. He knew courage. But he did not yet know how deeply the world would remember his name. Jesse called for his youngest son. "David, take bread and grain to your brothers on the battlefield. Bring me news of them." There was no fanfare, no heavenly trumpet, no prophecy in that moment. Just an errand. A simple delivery. David packed quickly, bread, cheese, grain, and walked toward the Valley of Elah, unaware that every step brought him closer to the moment that would alter history. The valley hummed with tension when David arrived. Soldiers moved in hurried lines, armor rattling, fear visible in their eyes. His 3 older brothers were among them, stern, worn, and battle-weary. Then David heard it. That voice. That booming, taunting challenge echoing across the valley. A challenge that brought grown men to their knees. "Goliath." David stopped. Not frozen. Curious. "Who is this man?" David asked. "That he should defy the armies of the living God?" The soldiers stared at him. Some scoffed. Some laughed. Others looked at him the way you look at a child who has wandered too close to fire. But David didn't laugh. His eyes were steady. Almost fearless. Eliab, David's eldest brother, stormed toward him. "What are you doing here? Who's watching the sheep?" he snapped. "You're just here to watch the battle." But David stood firm. "I only asked a question." What his brother couldn't see was the fire forming inside him. Not pride, not ego, but purpose. David felt something shift in the air, something greater than fear, greater than the giant's voice. He walked past his brother, past the mocking soldiers, past the disbelief. He made a decision that would shape the next 1,000 years of storytelling. David asked to be taken to the king. The shepherd was walking toward destiny. Inside the royal tent, King Saul sat in silence. The once mighty warrior, the tallest man in Israel, now carried a heaviness the kingdom could feel. His armor, once a symbol of strength, lay untouched. The glint was gone, dulled by days of fear and sleepless nights. He had heard Goliath's challenge 40 times. And 40 times, he felt the same sting of helplessness. While Saul traced the grip of his unused sword, he was told, "A young shepherd asks to speak with you." Saul raised his eyes slowly, weary, doubtful, but nodded for the boy to enter. And David stepped inside, a sling resting at his belt, sundust still on his clothes, confidence in his posture. There was no fear in his eyes, no shaking hands, only calm conviction. Saul frowned. "You wish to fight the giant?" David nodded without hesitation. "Let no one lose heart. I will fight him. A shepherd. A boy." Yet he spoke to a king as if courage itself stood inside him. Saul shook his head slowly. "You are only a youth. Goliath has been a warrior longer than you have been alive." Anyone else would have backed down, but David stepped closer. "Your servant has kept his father's sheep," he began. "When a lion came, I struck it down. When a bear rose against me, I seized it by the jaw and killed it." Saul blinked, unsure if he heard correctly. David continued, "The Lord who rescued me from the lion and the bear will rescue me from this Philistine." It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't bravado. It was certainty, the kind that does not come from skill, but from faith forged in lonely fields where no one applauds your victories. The king studied him. Small, unarmored, untrained, and yet, something radiated from him. A quiet power Saul no longer carried. After a long silence, Saul whispered, "Go, and may the Lord be with you." It was the first hopeful thing he had said in weeks. Saul ordered his attendants to bring armor for the shepherd. If David was going to face a giant, he would do so armored like a warrior of Israel. They placed Saul's bronze helmet on David's head. It slid down over his eyebrows. They strapped Saul's breastplate onto him. It hung loose around his ribs. They placed Saul's sword in David's hand. It felt impossibly heavy. David took a step, then another. Stiff, awkward, weighed down by metal he wasn't meant to wear. He shook his head. "I cannot go in these. I am not used to them." A hush fell. Then David removed every piece, laid it gently on the ground, and stood once again as he was. A shepherd, not a soldier. Sometimes destiny is met not by becoming something greater, but by refusing to be anything other than what you truly are. David walked out of the king's tent. The valley stretched before him, wide, open, humming with tension. He moved toward a small brook, its waters whispering over smooth stones. Soldiers watched in confusion. What is he doing? Where is his armor? Is he truly going out there with only that? David knelt beside the water. He searched carefully, deliberately, running his fingers over the pebbles. Not jagged ones, not rough ones. Smooth stones, the kind that fly straight and true. He selected 5. Not because he lacked faith, but because a shepherd knows preparation is not unbelief. He placed them in his pouch, stood, and tightened his sling. Now he was ready. David stepped forward. The ground felt different now, heavier somehow, as if each step carried the weight of Israel's entire future. Israelite soldiers lined the ridge behind him. Some whispered prayers. Some shook their heads. Others simply watched, unable to comprehend the sight. A boy, walking alone toward a giant. Across the valley, Goliath emerged again. Iron plate shining, spear point glinting like a shard of the sun. His shield-bearer trudged ahead, struggling to keep pace with the giant's monstrous stride. Goliath's laughter echoed when he saw David. "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" His voice rolled through the valley like thunder. David did not stop walking. "This day," he replied, "the Lord will deliver you into my hands." No quiver in his voice. No hesitation. Just truth. The valley held its breath. David reached his position. Goliath lowered his spear. Israel fell silent. Philistines smirked. The shepherd placed his hand inside his pouch, wrapped his fingers around a stone, raised his sling, and the valley stood at the edge of the impossible. This is where fate turns, where courage becomes history. The Valley of Elah had never been so quiet. Two armies stood frozen on their ridges, tens of thousands of men, locked in a moment where the world itself seemed unsure of what would happen next. Dust drifted slowly. A hot wind carried the faint rattle of armor. The sun hovered mercilessly overhead. David and Goliath faced each other. A boy and a giant. One bare-armed, barefoot, unarmored. The other a living fortress of iron and bronze. The shepherd tightened his grip on the sling. Inside his pouch, 5 stones waited, but he knew he would only need one. Across the valley, Goliath slammed the butt of his spear into the earth. The ground shuddered. Goliath began to move first. A slow, heavy stride. The clatter of armor echoed like thunder rolling through a canyon. Closer, closer, closer. His shield-bearer struggled to keep up, stumbling in the dust as he tried to match the giant's monstrous pace. Goliath grinned, the cruel smile of a man who had never known fear, never tasted defeat. "I will feed your flesh to the birds of the air," he snarled. David didn't flinch. He stepped lightly, almost gracefully, the movement of a shepherd approaching a wolf, not a warrior approaching a battle. "You come at me with sword and spear," he answered calmly, "but I come against you in the name of the Lord." It was not bravado. It was not bluff. It was truth ringing like a bell across the valley. David placed the stone into the leather pouch of his sling. He raised it slowly, deliberately, and then he began to turn. The sling circled once, twice, 3 times. A sharp whir sliced the air, the unmistakable sound of an object gaining unstoppable momentum. The shepherd's movements were fluid, practiced, almost poetic. This was not the first time he had swung a sling, but it was the first time the world would witness what a sling could truly do. Goliath lifted his shield, confused for half a heartbeat. And that was all David needed. The stone left the sling with a piercing whistle. Not an arc, not a wobble, a perfect, lethal line. The smooth stone cut through the dusty air and found its target, the narrow gap in Goliath's helmet, the one place untouched by iron. A crack split the silence. A sound no one expected. A sound that changed the fate of a nation. The stone sank into the giant's forehead. His eyes widened with disbelief. The ground shook as he stumbled. A roar tried to escape his lungs, but never made it out. Goliath collapsed. The earth trembled as his body hit the valley floor with the force of a falling mountain. For the first time in his life, Goliath of Gath was silent. A gasp rippled across the Israelite ridge, followed by silence, then disbelief. On the Philistine side, shields lowered in confusion. Mouths hung open. For a long, breathless moment, no one moved. David stood alone beside the fallen body, no taller than the giant's thigh. He did not celebrate. He did not shout. He simply walked toward Goliath's motionless form, steady as moonlight over a quiet field. The shepherd bent down, lifted the giant's own massive sword. The blade was heavy, but destiny often is. David raised the sword, and with one decisive stroke, he ended the battle. The shepherd had defeated the unbeatable. A boy had felled a legend, and for the first time in 40 days, Israel breathed again. Silence lasted only a heartbeat. Then, a roar exploded from the Israelite army, a sound so thunderous it seemed to shake the hills. Soldiers raised their swords, shields, and voices to the heavens. The Philistines, struck with terror, did the only thing they could: they ran. Israel charged after them, chasing them all the way to the gates of Ekron. But David did not pursue. He stood in the valley, calm amid the storm of victory, the severed head of the giant beside him, the symbol that Israel's despair had been defeated by faith, not force. A shepherd boy had changed a nation, and history would carry his name forever. The battle was over, but the valley still trembled with the echo of what had just taken place. Israel had chased the Philistines beyond their own gates, yet David remained in the Valley of Elah, standing beside the fallen giant. The wind carried the quiet murmur of awe. Soldiers who moments earlier had doubted him now stared at him with disbelief, and something deeper: respect, maybe even reverence. David lifted Goliath's severed head, not in triumph but in proof. Proof that the terror of Israel was no more. Proof that the impossible had been done. As he walked toward the Israelite camp, the soldiers slowly parted to let him through. They stared at him like he had stepped out of a prophecy, not a pasture. The boy did not boast. He did not smile. He walked in silence, a shepherd returning from a battlefield as though it were just another field he had crossed. When David entered King Saul's tent, a hush fell. The king, still reeling from the news, rose slowly to his feet. The shepherd placed Goliath's head on the ground. Saul stared, long, quiet, almost frightened. "Whose son are you?" he finally asked. Not because he didn't know David's family, but because he could not believe that such a victory could come from a boy of ordinary lineage. David replied with humility, "I am the son of your servant Jesse of Bethlehem." There was no pride in his voice, no celebration, no hint that he understood what he had become. But Saul did. And Saul felt something he had not felt in years: a threat. Jonathan, Saul's son, stood nearby. He had watched the battle from the ridge. He had seen the courage, the calm, the faith. And now, seeing David up close, dusty, worn, steady, something stirred in him. Not jealousy, not rivalry, recognition. Jonathan saw the purity of David's courage, a courage without calculation, without ambition, without hunger for power. Their eyes met. Two young men from different worlds. One a prince trained for war, one a shepherd who had just toppled a giant. In that moment, their souls bound together in a friendship so deep that Scripture would later say Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Jonathan removed his own robe and placed it on David, a symbolic act that carried weight deeper than words, an act that said, "I see who you truly are." When we look back at the story of David and Goliath, it becomes more than a tale of ancient warfare. It is a reminder, etched into Scripture, that God does not measure strength the way the world does. David was not the strongest. He was not the tallest. He was not the most trained, the most equipped, or the most experienced. He was simply available and aligned with the God who fights battles no human strength can win. The giant fell that day, not because David's aim was perfect, but because David's faith was. And that truth echoes into our world today. There are giants we face: fear, doubt, sickness, depression, financial struggle, broken relationships. Giants that mock us. Giants that tell us we can't win. Giants that stand in the valley, daring us to believe God is not enough. But the story of David reminds us, quietly, clearly, powerfully, that the battle is the Lord's. Your sling may look small. Your stones may look ordinary. Your odds may look impossible. But with God, the impossible becomes the expected. David ran toward the battle with confidence, not in himself, but in the one who had never failed him. And that same God stands with you now. In every valley, in every challenge, in every impossible circumstance, you are not fighting alone. You never were. So whatever giant stands before you today, lift your eyes, steady your heart, and remember the promise that carried a shepherd boy into victory. For the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Hold on to faith, even when the giant roars. Stand firm, even when the valley shakes. Because when God is with you, the giant still falls. Before we close, let this moment be your reminder. If this story strengthened your faith, if it stirred something inside you, if it reminded you that God still wins battles, then stay connected with us. Subscribe, not just to follow the next episode, but to walk with us through more stories of courage, hope, and divine power. Every week, we explore the truths that strengthen faith and lift the soul. So click subscribe, and let's continue this journey together, trusting the God who still brings giants to their knees.